Okay, I believe that we are live. Those of you who are listening to us on Facebook, Instagram, and elsewhere, I'm sorry if I'm a pixelated presence. I'm hoping you can still hear my voice because I guess I don't have the bandwidth today. But nonetheless, I'm Ravi Shankar. Welcome to this really special evening of writers from around the world. And we're going to hear from each of them, and then we'll have some conversation that encompasses everyone here. But very quickly, we have with us Patrick Ellington, Fernando Carrera, Sri Iyer, Francis Kaiwa Wang, and Rakesh Cowell. So welcome, everyone. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I know we have some folks from Australia and someone from Michigan and the West Coast. How are you all doing? How are you all holding up during this unprecedented moment?
Hanging on best we can.
Try not to get sick.
Yeah.
I was telling my wife, Ravi, that when we got married, the dream was to become soulmates. We had no idea we'd end up as prison cellmates.
Well, it's probably a good test of a soulmate if you could be a good cellmate, I suppose.
Exactly.
Yes, excellent. Well, I wanted to briefly introduce, for those of you who are watching who don't know, this event is put together by the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators, AP Writers. You can see them online, follow them on Facebook. And really, for many of my American friends, I like to describe it as a kind of Asian version of AWP, without some of the kind of overt careerist impulses that sometimes come at the detriment of community. So it's a great organization. The conference this year, which was meant to be in Bangalore, India, is going to be rescheduled for next year. But we have a publication, Meridian, which has work from some of the members that's going to be due out in November. So you should keep your eyes open for that. And in combination with the New York Writers Workshop, and again, you can follow New York Writers Workshop online. They offer a wide variety of workshops, both in the city and online, for writers of every level. And wow, it really does freeze you in the most unforgiving moments, doesn't it? The New York Writers Workshop has run immersive writing workshops in Sardinia and has an amazing faculty. So I encourage you to check out their website. And so I thank both of those organizations for allowing us to put this isolation break reading series together. First up, we have a good friend of mine that I'm so glad to see. I think last time we spent time together was in Canada, Fernando Carrera, and he's been awarded a number of different grants, including the National Poetry Prize for Horacio Zuzinga and the National Award for Young Literature. And his poems have been translated into many languages, including Russian, Turkish, Greek, Slovenian, and Albanian. But I'm most excited to announce that he has a new book of translations in the English that is just supposed to be birthed into the world now. Right? So, Fernando, would you please tell us about this book and introduce yourself and your poems, my friend?
Definitely. Thank you very much, first and foremost, to you, Ravi, for curating this reading, to my fellow colleagues and writers in this virtual table. It's really a pleasure. And thanks, of course, to the institutions that convene this series of readings, to the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators, and to the New York Writers Workshop. Thanks so much for this invite. And yeah, my most recent book, published in Spanish, the first edition released back in 2018, it's going to be re-released in a bilingual second edition in July, possibly by the end of this month. Translation is already set, already done by the wonderful Jennifer Radman. She's a poet and translator from Ohio. and she has really done a wonderful job. We're really pleased with her translations of the book, and they really convey the intentions and the essence of it. So I'm going to read a couple of points from that collection. And one of them is precisely the one that was fortunately selected for the Meridian Anthology. And so I think this is an unbeatable occasion for doing so, for sharing it. And well, as soon as you let me know, I'll start reading that one.
Okay, Fernando, please go ahead. And I'm also interested. You want to tell everyone listening, you usually compose in Spanish, but you also do some of the co-translation in English. You're obviously completely conversant in both languages.
Yeah, of course. My mother tongue is Spanish, and this is a translation by Jennifer Radman. Of course, I'm a translator myself as well. From English to Spanish, I've translated Ravi, of course, amongst many other poets worldwide. And well, yep, these are the English versions from Jennifer Radman. Actually, this is the first edition of the book. I don't know if you can see it. Its original title in Spanish is Fuego a Voluntad. And the title in English will be Fire of Volition.
All right, take it away, Fernando.
Thank you so much. Well, I'll start with the poem that was selected for this important anthology, and its title is Abandonment. Abandonment. I'm not much, something perhaps. After all, to seize the nothingness, submerge myself in it, see the profound blue of the wave after it breaks. With new eyes I wash what's left, and I'm here again, with the astonishment intact of he who has nothing, without a storyline, naked in contact with the earth, primitive, facing the warmth of the fire, a boy upon tasting the bread for the first time. In the end, silence and its textures, murmurs of air, my own breathing, barely the cracking of the eyelid upon opening, the light that baits the movement of the foliage, a tree always in the beginning, and the sound of water that is its image more than all of its extension in the gaze. Silence is my new name, and yet I remember what I was. The heart, like an old city, embraces its initial wound, protecting it. Birthmark, they will say, here comes the son of fury, he who has breastfed unjust milk. I move on. There is no waiting for he who wishes to continue. I don't even keep a stroke for the return to the time that no longer belongs to me. The possibility of seeing, feeling, ageless, intact light, move the right or left foot, write my name on the wet sand where I begin. Well, that was the first poem, and I think I still have enough time to read the second one from the same poetry collection, of course, from Fire of Volition. And this is a prose poem. Am I still in time, Ravi?
Yes, you do. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. This is a prose poem called Intestines Don't Lie. And it starts with an epic wrath from Euripides that says the following. Aegisthus took the entrails in his hands and inspected them. Now the liver had no lobe, while the portal vein and nearby gallbladder revealed threatening approaches to the one who was observing it. Aegisthus was angry, but my master asked, why are you disheartened? Stranger, I fear some treachery from abroad. That's the epic wrath. Intestines don't lie, they've told you. The mind does. Rhizomes are jellyfish swimming in the thought, where everything originates, they say. Consciousness and its creations, face of the one who dwells on the walls. In the shower her trace, sometimes at night her abrupt snort awakes you still. Your bowels, internal flower, don't lie. You know it by the sudden pulsation. You feel a drum in every finger, and in the red wave of your dermis that substitutes the tics you haven't yet developed. If I open the window, will something get in or out? You ask uselessly. You open it. Some of the suffocation and smoke escape that, like a memory jump from the frying pan where you cook something you don't know. Awkward hands, the genes for it. Even so, you try. Escape. From you, blood is accumulation of shadows. They burn. Even though everything announces its name of ruins, its recent baptism of dust. Even though the seed of the next mutation is found in the crack of the most secret wound. Intestines don't lie, they've told you. Hunger is always a sign, birthmark of the next step. Always naked like desire. You escape. Outside, the sea is within your reach. Leave to return, leave to return, you whisper. You open the door to the apartment with a question, abandoning its flammable material. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fernando. And tell us again where we can get the Fire of Volition.
Fire of Volition will be edited by and released by Mantis Editores, which is one of the prime poetry seals, prime poetry book houses in Mexico, and they will release it in this bilingual edition. It will be distributed in Mexico, Latin America, and Spain, and also we will be distributing some of its copies, of course, here in the United States.
All right, wonderful. We'll definitely keep an eye out for that, and I'll post links.
I will be sharing all its information soon in social media.
Perfect. Thank you, Fernando.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Wonderful. Next up, we have Sri Davey Iyer, who I'm glad to introduce because she's also not only a terrific writer and someone who I've known for many years since being at Hong Kong, but she is also a board member of the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators, and I'm hoping before she begins that she could speak a little bit to the purpose of that organization, because we really have been transforming and growing, and I think offering a necessary, unique organization in that part of the world. But Sri is the author of a couple of books, The Jungle Without Water, which was shortlisted for a number of prizes, and most recently, The Tiniest House of Time, which is a book I really recommend. It's a kind of family epic that spans different time periods and different geographic regions, and it's a really stunning accomplishment. And she's coming to us from Melbourne, where she teaches at RMIT. Sri.
Hi, Ravi. Thank you so much for having me here. And it's also so wonderful to be among such an illustrious group of writers. I'm very grateful for that. And yeah, as Ravi said, this manuscript actually started around the time I met Ravi in Hong Kong I think about 10 years ago now. So it's been ages. And yes, I do want to say a couple of words about APWT. As a member of the management committee, I came to APWT some years ago, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, and found it such an incredible organization. I had a wonderful experience every time I attended their conferences, whether it was in Bali or more recently in the Gold Coast up in Queensland. The idea with APWT is that apart from trying to form a connection between Asia Pacific writers and to form an ongoing network and promoting their work and promoting opportunities, APWT also holds annual events in different parts of the Asia Pacific. And we use that platform as an opportunity to bring a lot of writers that you don't usually hear about. They've been working away for many years in many parts of Asia, but you just don't know who they are. And that's kind of one of the things I absolutely adore about APWT and what they do. So I'm very glad for this opportunity as well, and I very much urge all of you to look that up when you can. So with regards to the book, it's called The Tiniest House of Time. It's my sort of, how do I say, the book that I've been writing forever, I'll just put it that way. And it spans from 1930s Burma to 1990s Malaysia, when the then Deputy Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim was sacked by the current government then, right down to Malaysia again, Malaysia and Melbourne, I suppose, of 2007. And it spans several generations, and it looks at connections between women of different generations. And the section that I want to quickly read out today looks at the section in Malaysia in the 1990s when Anwar Ibrahim actually gets sacked. And it looks at the event through the eyes of a group of young friends who are just gathering around a table and are going through the germs of a political awakening. I'll just put it that way. And here we go. You can't be serious. During the games? Why would they? Anwar Ibrahim smiled back at Sandhya from the front page of the New Straits Times. A small smirk, just enough to give the impression of scant attention to the camera while thinking of other things. His songkok, velvet like the rest of the cabinet's headgear, tilted the extra 5 degrees, transiting from official to jaunty. Sandhya had once spotted Anwar at the local Kedah airport when she was in secondary school. He had been the education minister then, responsible for all the exams in the nation. He was at the airport on unofficial business, not a sign of the press. Only a few officials clustered around the man. Yet the building was illuminated. He simply glowed. He drew eyes to him as if he carried a personal halo, although he never looked around at anyone, not once. The newspaper, already greasy from Faisal and Jamal's handling, softened further in Sandhya's hands. The two boys smirked as they sat down, glad to be harbingers of bad news. They ordered iced tea from the hawker center, and Sandhya read out the headline. Anwar's victims sentenced to 2 years, she read, aware that Faisal was watching her. A short, dark Indian man brought the 2 iced teas, and Sandhya ignored his stare as Faisal paid him. The mamak stall was close enough if the group had to meet in a rush. Ida, Sandhya, Aoyong, Noor, Sulin, Faisal, and Jamal. Its illegal location on construction rubble meant incredible roti canais. Sandhya looked forward to these meetings, despite the staring Indian men and the greasy flatbreads. She rehearsed conversations, spouting imaginary dialogue in the showers. The meetings became a way to avoid the hostel. She always brought along her copy of Hikayat Hang Tuah and would leave it open on the table, her scribblings and earmarks exposed. Faisal's eyes would stray to it, but he never mentioned it. Ida peeked into the newspaper Sandhya held, and they allowed the broadsheet to engulf them. Sandhya spotted another article and sighed. It was a religious op-ed piece about the notion of culinary purity, on preparations, offerings, entities you can and cannot share with. The words seemed like the Vedic stipulations on food consumption, rules on what, when, and how one should eat, and most importantly, with whom. It said, spread this to your fellow Muslims. Let the hidden gems of the Quran find illumination through your noble conversations on the right way. Tell the imams to sermonize on this. Watch with whom you share your food and who offers it in return. The infidel, the kafir, is the pollutant, says the Quran. One must maintain purity in all things, including that which is edible. The mee goreng here is supposed to be delicious, Faisal said. Sandhya handed the newspaper to Ida, whose eyes were still on the lines of the Anwar article. She hadn't seen the op-ed. Sodomy. Ida read the word, then giggled. Is that a new kind of me? Sandhya groaned with the girls, and the boys laughed. But secretly, she was glad. She already knew what it meant. The definition was plastered all over the hostel bathrooms, and in such explicit detail, no dictionary had been necessary. Sandhya wondered if a new word would obliterate the current one, another strange term about unfamiliar acts in a publication that previously would not print the word sex for gender because it might corrupt the public. Both simultaneously. Same charges, tried at the same time, sentenced at the same time. Different cases, though, said Jamal. Do you think it's true? It could be true. Anwar could have actually done it, said Noor. Nonsense, said Faisal, waving his iced tea. Well, how do you know? Politicians don't live by the same rules as us. Anwar, a homosexual, guilty of sodomy, a traitor to his religion, a hypocrite in office. Yes, that is exactly what they want us to believe, said Faisal. He took a deep breath. But is that the point? Or is the point really that this is a convenient distraction that, one, gets rid of Anwar, two, stops us from thinking about the financial crisis for a while, and three, well, I haven't come up with that yet. Sandhya laughed with the rest, but she noticed Faisal didn't join in. He tapped his fork on the plastic plate in front of him with a deliberate, controlled rhythm. He seemed to simmer on something. It was that word. First, the word dipecat, which became the biggest buzzword in the country. It followed photos of Anwar in every newspaper and on every television for days. Sacked. Sandhya saw the word on television while visiting her parents. Her mother had cried, but mostly it was just silence. The kind of silence she had witnessed at her grandfather's funeral, where every visitor had sat around the corpse and wailed while the family gradually turned to pillars of granite. During dinner, only Grandma Sushila made any noise, burping and cackling to herself about mountains and lorries and wells as she cleared the dishes. Sandhya went to bed with her ear tuned to that strange kind of silence across the country, a collective horror. Deputy Prime Minister, number 2 official, thrown out in a day. She had returned to the hostel earlier on the pretext of receiving exam tips and had seen the same silence on Faisal's face. The word this time was like an abyss. Liwat, taking someone from behind. You said it or thought it, and nothing came back as a response for comprehension, much less judgment. Sandhya backed away from that abyss and let the word be just the lewd drawings on toilet walls. But she still saw the word amid the jokes on the private face of Faisal. In him she saw the shame of a lulled nation. Shell-shocked into a temporary pause, she also sensed an undercurrent of something still shackled and seething, something she could not reveal or define. Anwar's coming for Friday prayers next week, said Faisal at length at the National Mosque. Jamal nodded as if he had been expecting this. The closing ceremony for the games is soon too, I think, said Noor to nobody in particular. I'll be there, said Jamal, clearly meaning the mosque. And the boys too, I'll tell them tonight. My parents have tickets to the closing ceremony, said Noor. Faisal ignored her. It might get too rowdy for the girls, Jamal began. It would be them protecting us, Faisal shot back. I'll drop you guys there, said Ida to a general round of cheers. Ayong cited a date with Rajiv. Sulin mentioned the upcoming exams. Faisal turned to Sandhya. 3 plates of mee goreng arrived. The cutlery arrived separately. 3 pairs of greasy forks and spoons bunched up with pink napkins at the center of the table. Sulin reached out and took a pair. Jamal and Ayong reached out next. And Sandhya saw Jamal's arm twitch as his hand touched Ayong's. He wiped his fork and spoon with the napkin, and then, as if it meant nothing, his fingers. Sandhya finally looked up at Faisal. His gaze bore into her skull, unblinking, unyielding. Exams, Faisal. His face fell. And that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sri. Wonderful. And can you tell us again where we can find the Tiniest House of Time?
Yes. So the Tiniest House of Time, at the moment, it's out in Australia, but you can also find it on Amazon. I would actually suggest Amazon India. It's on there because you can get it at a much lower price, and I think you can get the Kindle edition via there as well. But it should be available all around the world, hopefully by end of the year. But at the moment, Amazon.
Wonderful. That's great. And so we're going to move from Melbourne, Australia, to someone I'm really happy to have on the reading today, Rakesh Cowell, who I got to know through his stewardship of the Indo-American Arts Council, the IAAC, which is an organization like APWT that does events in and around New York City dedicated to South Asian arts. And perhaps Rakesh can, I will assume that the festival is suspended this year, but Rakesh perhaps could talk to us about it. Rakesh's family hails from Kashmere, and he migrated to the U.S. in 1972 after becoming a gold medalist at IIT Delhi. During that year, he won a national writing competition organized by a leading American newspaper. He has had a distinguished career in business and also written for many leading newspapers. I served as a co-chairman of the Arts of Kashmere exhibition at the Asian Society and was a founding contributor to the first chair of India Studies at Berkeley in the Center for Advanced Study of India at UPenn, as well as the Mattu Center for India Studies at SUNY, New York. He has an MBA from University of Chicago, MS from Brown University, and he is also the author of a couple of speculative fiction novels that I think we'll be hearing from the latest today. The Last Queen of Kashmere, published by HarperCollins, and Dawn, The Warrior Princess of Kashmere, which was recently published by Penguin India. And so thank you so much for joining us, Rakesh.
And thank you, Ravi. And what a pleasure, Fernando. The word abandoned certainly resonated with me. And Shri, I love time, so I can understand your fascination with it. So my first novel is The Last Queen of Kashmere. This is a novel. This took about 12 years to work on. It was a labor of love, did well. My second novel that I'm going to do the reading out of is Dawn. This came out just recently. It was picked for the Jaipur Literary Festival 2020, and I was a featured speaker. Dawn is set in the year 3000, and it's the name of the protagonist. She is a 16-year-old girl, and she is the last woman on earth. There are 5 billion men paired up with robotic women, and she is the only real life woman left on earth, and she's 16-year-old. So I'm going to read out one small paragraph and then one small poem. Then my eyes fell on the mace that my mother had given me. It had the name Usha engraved on it. I was reminded of what my mother had told me. The mace is now bonded with you. You can will it to come to you in your hour of need, but give it freedom and don't overthink for it. It knows its dharma quite well. The mace had come to me Yuva had told me that I could have any name that I wanted. And so I, Dawn, decided my future name. Usha, the life of life and the death of death. Usha is a most fascinating name. The oldest text known to mankind in any Indo European language only has male divinities. There is only one divinity that is feminine. Her name is Usha, and Usha is dawn. Usha has some remarkable properties. It is the only divinity that is accepted universally around the world. Usha traveled to Greece and became Eos, modified into Aurora. In England, it became Eostre. Eostre became the foundation of the festival of Easter, and Easter is the story of resurrection, rebirth, the way dawn every morning is a symbol of. Every morning when dawn comes, she brings new hope. Now remember, if you were dawn, what is the mission you have had since inception? Since inception, dawn has only been facing darkness, right? If you were dawn, what would you be facing? You only face darkness. But you never stop. And the reason you never stop is because you know you have the light that you carry with you. So Dawn is the protagonist, Usha is the protagonist of this story. And I'm now going to read a nursery lullaby. My homeland of Kashmir is a very unique land because until the year 1400 AD, it was a land that was ruled by women. The highest spiritual truths were transmitted by women. It had more queens that were sovereigns than any other kingdom on the planet. And it was a beautiful place. But one of the small ways that you realize that it was a beautiful place is that it had many lullabies that were just for baby girls. Think about it for a minute. You have lots of lullabies that are gender neutral for babies. But this land had lullabies just for baby girls because girls were so precious and treasured. I'm going to read you a lullaby just for a baby girl. And this is a lullaby that Dawn's father, who had fallen into darkness, had actually sung to her when she was young and was, a baby. O fair one, I hold you tight in my heart, my cherub, so delicate like a heavenly flower. Soft like cream is my milky angel. Your birth was the awakening of my life. A good luck charm that I will wear to the end. My little angel, frolic with goddesses in your dreams. And when you awake, give me your sweet smile of recognition. It fills me, your father, with nectar. On your wedding, you will adorn divine earrings, dazzling the world, my little girl, with the beauty you bring. And when you depart with your beloved, you will leave behind a golden bird in my heart, singing, O little angel mine.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rakesh. And this book was published by Penguin India, but is it available here as well?
All over Amazon. You can get it on Amazon India, Amazon.com. And there's a Facebook page. You can go and see more details where I talk about this. One of the things that I talk about, which I share assertively with conviction, is that this book reveals what, at least in India, we think is the greatest technology that was ever created by humanity. It was a technology called Niti, Niti, and this is the first novel to ever be written using Niti principles in English. And you'll be quite fascinated by what Niti technology means, how it can empower you. And the promise of Niti is that there's a Niti solution to any challenge you have in your life. So it claims to be the most powerful technology there is.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rakesh. And I will hopefully those of you will can stay for a little discussion after our reading. Everyone on this panel has fascinating pasts, and Rakesh is equally interested in history as he is in the near and far future. So I hope you'll hear some of that. Those of you who are just joining us, I'm Ravi Shankar. This is Isolation Break. It's a reading collaboration between the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators, APWT, and the New York Writers Workshop, NYWW. And again, I encourage you to look up both of these organizations online, as they provide a wide variety of services to writers. And what I especially appreciate about APWT is the community there. And if you join, you'll be able to promote your work on the website and hopefully join us at one of the conferences. Next up, I'm very happy to be having a good friend of mine who I haven't seen in a while, but Francis Kaiwa Wang is a journalist, essayist, speaker, and activist, and a poet focused on issues of diversity, race, culture, and the arts. She is coming to us from Michigan, and she's worked in philosophy, ethnic new media, anthropology, international development, and her writing has appeared in many places such as NBC News Asian America, PRI Global Nation, Cha, Kartika, Drunken Boat, several anthologies, and she teaches courses on Asia Pacific, Islander American media and civil rights at the University of Michigan, and teaches creative writing at the University of Hawaii Hilo. She co-created a multimedia artwork for the Smithsonian Asia Pacific American Center Indian American Heritage Project online, and is a 2019 Knight Arts Challenge Detroit winner, as well as a Margaret Casey Foundation Equal Voice Journalist Fellow on Poverty, and an all-around awesome person who I think writes really incisively and hilariously on a number of issues, including race. So welcome, Francis. It's so good to see you.
Thanks, Ravi. It's so nice to be here and to meet everybody. Hello, I've got some friends I saw from Hawaii and Michigan, and so thank you all for coming. I think my mom is there too. So I wanted to start with a poem I wrote a month ago about the COVID-inspired anti-Asian violence. I wrote this for Detroit Public TV. I am in Michigan, and I wrote it right after all those armed protesters showed up at the Capitol with AK-47s demanding haircuts, and so this is and also I just want to preface it. I live right outside of Detroit, where in 1982 Vincent Chen was beaten to death by a baseball bat by two auto workers, and they were fined $3,000 and never spent a day in jail to this day. And so that's an important case in Asian American civil rights history, and that was the kind of the I'm going to say the impetus for the event that I wrote this for. All right, so finding home, crafting community. 1. First, I heard from the high schoolers at Chinese school that all their parents were stocking up on rice and bottled water. Then I heard about the fights breaking out in the California Costcos. Don't mess with Asian aunties. Weeks later, the rest of America went crazy for toilet paper. But I am the child of immigrants. So while y'all were #quarantine baking sourdough bread, I was sprouting bean sprouts, grinding soy milk, coagulating tofu from scratch, sewing masks. Old school. 2. Newspaper headlines. Asian students say coronavirus is spreading discrimination at Michigan State University, Lansing State Journal. Coronavirus graffiti at park leaves Asian American woman scared, frustrated, Royal Oak Tribune. Local groups respond to aggression against the Asian community, WZZM Grand Rapids. 3. When I first came for grad school, the only thing I knew about Michigan was that this was where Vincent Chen was killed, and I was afraid. 27 years old, Chinese American, a bachelor party, a baseball bat. It's because of you, little, that we are out of work, said the white auto worker. These aren't the kind of men you send to jail, said the judge. All these years I've lived in Michigan, I've held it at arm's length, felt like I did not belong, waited for the day I can finally return home. Then I learned about all the people who came together across differences of race and ethnicity, demanding justice for Vincent Chen, the people who still speak out to defend others, the people who would craft a new answer to the question Vincent Chen's mother asked all those years ago. What kind of law is this? What kind of justice? 4. More newspaper headlines. Chinese Americans in Michigan donate more than 200,000 masks, supplies, Detroit Free Press. Michigan leaders encourage reporting of anti-Asian American hate crimes amid COVID-19, WWNT West Michigan. Opinion, hate has no home in Michigan, especially in coronavirus crisis, Bridge Magazine. 5. As the hashtag surge, hashtag stop AAPI hate, wash the hate, I am not a virus, hate is a virus, stand against hatred, and Big Gretch starts trending. I feel, for the first time in all these years, like I belong here, like I am not alone here, like this can be home here. Even as the last snowstorm of the season sweeps in tomorrow. But in choosing to call this place home, we have to make this home for all of us, all our communities. Hashtag Asians for Black Lives, hashtag Flint Water Crisis, hashtag Run with Ahmaud. What will you do to craft new answers for community and solidarity? So that was written right, I finished it right when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, and it feels so long ago. It's only a month ago. I wrote a new piece about today's protest, but it's not quite there yet, so I can't share it, sorry. But next I wanted to share a piece from Suggestion of Salt. This is a piece that Ravi and I wrote together right when we first met. We met at a reading, and Ravi said, let's write a collaborative poem. I'm like, sure, that'd be great. What's a collaborative poem? And Ravi said, you'll see. And so we wrote this piece together. So it's an incredibly long poem, but I'm just going to read one small excerpt of it today that I think has resonance with what's going on today. Yeah, and I guess in this, it talks about a story about an African-American boy who was walking across Ravi's campus the day after Halloween. He was still in his Halloween costume from the night before, but they called the police, everyone went crazy. So that's what that part of it's about. So this is a part from a Suggestion of Salt. Oh, and if you want to read the whole Suggestion of Salt, you can find it at knightslibrarymagazine.com, spring 2020 issue. And it's Knights like K-N-I-G-H-T. Okay. I was first told the story of Hanuman in the Himalayas by people with no power, people amused by the powerful's incompetence to identify a simple herb. I traded them stories of the mighty Sun Wukong, master of 72 transformations, except for his tail, fireproof, immortal, troublemaker, king, kept in line by a golden crown. My grandfather gave me these stories in a cramped Ontario apartment when I was 10, yet I too once gave up my power for a golden crown and behaved in obedience to its pinch. I follow the news of a young boy of color walking across your campus at Halloween, a sword across his back. I have the same sword, have walked across campus many times with it, practiced in the alley behind philosophy with it. I did not know how lucky we are to be alive, merely arrested for other people's fears, once again given away by our inability to transform our tales completely. What kind of place is this, that the son of a professor cannot walk across campus without police and SWAT teams being called? What kind of exercise is this, that I'm watching the real-time news feed and Twitter feed of some distant poet's town? Hashtag CCSU lockdown. I look forward to your letters too much. I wake up every morning at 3:30 a.m., too cold to sleep, too sleepy to work, so I reach for my phone in the dark to read your most recent poem again. And then, do I have time, Ravi? Can I just finish one more?
Yeah, it's a quick one. I think you have time.
Oh, it's a quick one. I was going to do a long one. Okay, let me do a quick one instead. I was going to do the new one that's in. So I have a new poem that's coming out of Meridian in the fall. I was going to read that, but that one's way too long. So I'm going to do a short, fun one. This is an excerpt from a Drunken Boat poem. I know, yay, Drunken Boat. I think the poem is called Precarious Truth, something, and preparing for the Sriracha apocalypse. Sorry, I didn't print that one out here. So there's just a selection from it. But this is a fun childhood one. My parents wake me in the middle of the night. Chilai, hurry. Only enough time to grab my favorite doll, and I have been bundled bleary-eyed into the car, and we are driving through the 3 tunnels that mark the way, then burst into the light and cacophony that is old LA Chinatown at midnight. We always come in the back door, through the kitchen, past the uncles with their giant woks and oil. Ta! Our eyes adjust to the darkness of the restaurant, and then aunties, uncles, little friends, 宵夜 time. That means 偶尔小笼包猪耳红油抄手粥. But first we order 香片茶, which I always thought was champagne tea, which makes sense. These days, teenage girls gather around my kitchen table, and I ply them with mango mochi and 香片茶, pretending not to eavesdrop as they celebrate college admissions. I got into MIT! Gasp over who is sending whom naked Snapchats. Ew! And cry over, my mom says I'm not allowed to date those steezy, 3rd-generation, snapback-wearing California Asian boys with the expensive shoes. Thank you.
Oh, that was great, Francis. Thank you. And I was hoping that the poem that you have in Meridian, White People, is a classic, really. And so hopefully when that book comes out, we'll have a chance to hear that poem from you, because I love that.
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Terrific. And do you have any projects you want to promote, Francis, at the moment?
Oh, right now I'm working on an anthology of essays from activists about the Vincent Chin case, and I'm collecting art about the Vincent Chin case. So if you know anyone with art who has created art about the Vincent Chin case, send them my way. And also there's where's my chapbook? I have 3 chapbooks. Imaginary Ferris, Dream of the Diaspora, Where the Lava Meets the Sea. They all basically look like this. One's red, one's yellow, one's pink. And you can find it at, there we go, blacklava.net/books. Okay? And while you're there, buy a t-shirt. Ryan Suda's got all sorts of great Asian American Pacific Islander themed t-shirts. And let's see, is this working? This is my website and my Twitter handle. So come find me, and we can be friends.
Wang. Great. Thank you so much, Francis. And again, those of you who are joining us, this is Isolation Break at APWT NYWW Jam joint. And we have a final reader today, and then we'll stick around for a little conversation with all of our writers. As you can tell, are working in disparate medium and coming to us from places around the globe. And so we're going back to Australia with Patrick Ellington, who's a writer and editor from South Australia. His novel Rise and Shine, published by Scribe, has just been newly released, and I believe has been released worldwide now. and his 2009 novel Figurehead was longlisted for Australia's Miles Franklin Literary Award. His short essays, fiction, and reviews have appeared widely, and he's taught politics, communications, publishing, editing, and creative writing, most recently at Flinders University in Australia. So welcome, Patrick. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Ravi. So good to be here. So good to be sharing the screen with these other writers. I can also see the live comments from people who are watching and listening, and it's just such a privilege to be sharing this hour or so with people from around the world. I'm going to read the first couple of pages from my just released novel Rise and Shine, which, if I can get it, there it is. Been out for a week now in Australia and New Zealand. Other territories I very much hope to follow. I won't tell you too much about the book because I'm going to read from the very start, but I will just say that it's about the end of the world. So well done, Ravi, for assisting us to end on a cheerful note as the final read. This is Rise and Shine. The end, when everything seemed lost, turned into the beginning. And in the beginning, there was Barton and Walker. No one who survived could really say whether it was a single big catastrophe or a series of smaller messes, or if it was just the slow grind of excess. Probably it was all of that. Maybe Russia dropped a bomb on San Francisco. Maybe it didn't. Sorry, Fernando. Maybe the Nile became poisoned. Maybe it didn't. Maybe the last of the ice caps turned yellow. Maybe they didn't. Maybe vitamin C turned out to be carcinogenic. Maybe it didn't. Governments of all brands, the UN, the anti-UN, the World Bank, FIFA, all spoke loud and long about what needed to happen. But by then, no one could tell information from lies. The details hardly matter now. The Earth, pushed past its limits, began to eat its own. Most of the 8 billion victims died over a period of a few months. Quickly, slowly, these things are relative. Living another day and another depended on who you were and where you were. The survivors tried to eat and drink in the same way that they had always, even as they saw carp floating in rivers, even as dust invaded cities and towns, even as rain pierced skin, even as the tides went wherever they wanted. Barton and Walker, friends since childhood, dragged themselves around the city that became Rise. They looked for but never found loved ones, joined small bands when it seemed safe to do so, abandoned them at the first hint of violence, skirted fires, except when they needed to try to boil water, avoided dirty lakes where no lakes had previously sat, and took their chances by swallowing what they could scavenge. Picture them. Walker looking like a boy, but for his height, Barton already looking like herself, slinking through the centre of the city, drawn by rumours of a supermarket intact under the rubble. They are filthy. Their clothes are rags. The stress of their situation, the city situation, the planet situation is etched on their faces. They are alive, unlike their parents, their siblings, most of their friends, but they know. They've talked about it, reconciled themselves to it, that they shouldn't be, and that they won't be soon. They find no supermarkets that night. There are none left to find. There is very little of anything to find, other than rumours and innuendo. But they do encounter a small group of people who have surrounded a shirtless man who sits on the ground in the middle of the faded bitumen road. The man wears a see-through bandage that covers one hand and runs all the way to his shoulder. He shakes his arm, which looks distorted under the plastic bandage. "I can't feel it," he says. "I can't feel my arm." Barton crouches in front of him and takes a knife from her pants. "It's okay," she says to the man. "Give her a moment," Walker says to the crowd, some of whom have slipped their hands into pockets, fingering their own weapons. There is no rule of law now, other than one-to-one negotiation. Barton makes a careful cut into the bandage at the shoulder end. She puts the knife away, easing the tension, and begins, slowly, to unravel the plastic. The arm reveals itself, withered by burns, covered in bruises and lumps, and hanging loose as if the bone has turned to rubber. Now that Barton has removed the bandage, it's apparent that the man's wrist is so twisted that his hand faces the wrong way. Something about this man captivates the crowd. Not just the arm or the way he continues to swing it about, but all of him. His spirit, his hopeless resilience. They stare at him, frankly. He lets them. Walker glances at Barton. Her hand rests on her belly and she has the oddest look of hope and almost contentment on her face. She meets Walker's gaze, sees his puzzlement. "Look again," she whispers. "Look harder." He looks, he feels, and he begins to understand. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Patrick. It's great to
Thank you,
hear.
Ravi.
Tell us about, so this book has just come out, and I know that probably the readings and launches you're going to do have been somehow altered by this. So how are you spreading the word about this, and what's happening with the release?
Yeah, I'm doing a launch tomorrow night on Australian time by Zoom, which is the main way that I communicate with everybody at the moment, I think. So if I can remember to take my microphone off mute, we'll launch tomorrow night.
So that's what you get with Isolation Break, a little pre-launch appetizer from Patrick's novel. Very good. Well, wonderful. Again, this is Isolation Break. I'm Ravi Shankar. You've just heard from a great variety of writers from around the world. I want to thank each of them for being with us and for sharing their new work with us. And leaves us enough time to have a little bit of conversation. And there's interesting issues I'd like to explore with each of you. And certainly if Patrick is right in that this form of communication in some ways is going to supplement the ways in which we usually interact is interesting to think about. But I want to begin with you, Rakesh, because I'm so curious about how you got interested in speculative fiction. And I also kind of promised, and I'm hoping that you can tell people about your Indiana Jones phase, your anthropological quest to discover and bring Durga back to India where it belonged. So it's fascinating to me that you have both of these poles of interest, the historical and the science fiction.
Yeah, so remember in India, we have a very different framework than what we have in the West. In India, we believe that time is circular and past, present, and future coexist. So the framework of what is history and what is future doesn't exist in our framework. So with that as a preface, my interest in the first novel, The Last Queen of Kashmir, was triggered by a very simple thing. She's probably the greatest queen that India has had, and probably one of the greatest queens in the world that nobody knew about. And so there was a sense of discovery, bringing her to life, bringing her, and the good news is it became a bestseller. So I think people resonated to the story. My interest in Dawn sprung really from the most popular collection of stories known to mankind, which is the Panchtantra. The Panchtantra was written probably, somewhere in BC, and it became it's the most translated collection of stories in the world. It traveled through Iran into Arabia, became the foundation of Aesop's fairy tales and Grimm stories, worked its way into Fontaine, the Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. So I was very intrigued by the Panchtantra, and then I looked at other great stories, the Ocean of Stories, the Kathasarit Saga, Yog Vashisht, and I realized that there was something very profound in that framework. I touched upon it in terms of Niti, and my desire was to bring that technology to modern contemporary times. And I'll just take only a minute to talk about this technology. The starting point about this technology is really captured in Rumi's classic line, sell knowledge by imagination.
Mm.
And so the ancient Indian writers spent a lot of time, even before Rumi was born, on that. And what was created was a certain genre of writing, which was basically writing that creates a state of wonderment. It was only much later in Europe, something like maybe 1500 years later, that Descartes, in his book Passion of the Soul, said, wonder is the first passion of the soul. So these stories are written in a state of wonder. And this wonder causes you to open your mind, and then wonderful things happen that explain the novel. Now, let me quickly segue. I took too much time. Let me quickly segue. About 10 years ago, India's number one art collector was having dinner with me. He was very sad. And he said, Rakesh Cowell, you're from Kashmere, and I say this to you in frustration because there's nothing you can do about it. But the oldest continuously worshipped feminine divine form, which in India we call Durga, has been stolen out of India. Now, this Durga had been continuously worshipped for 1200 years. And it had been stolen out by smugglers. And I don't know how many of you know that The Moonstone is the first detective mystery novel in the English language, which concerns the robbery of a very precious stone out of India. It's an English novel. And I don't know what made me say to this art curator, I said, whatever it takes, I'm going to try and recover it. And to just leap to the end, it was an Indiana Jones type of journey in which I encountered the most dangerous. Turned out he was the most dangerous art smuggler in the world. When he got arrested, they found $200 million of stolen art in his warehouse in New Jersey. I had to work with the embassy in Germany and Archaeological Survey of India, and everybody said, nothing will happen, nothing will happen. But the grand conclusion is that when Chancellor Angela Merkel went to India for the first time a couple of years ago to visit the newly elected Prime Minister Modi, in her private jet, she carried the Durga with her as a return gift to India.
Wow, what a story.
Yeah, what an awesome story.
Yes. I actually would be a perfect segue to you, Sri, I think, because I saw you nodding your head, catching some of Rakesh's references. But I also know that you're working in a similar vein across different spans of geography as well as language when you work on your book. How did you deal with all of that working on Tiny? Because it's a very ambitious project, the Tiniest Houses of Time.
Yes, it is. I didn't think it would end up being as massive as it is now. And also, I think I have to say, going back a bit to what Rakesh was saying about how how he views time, or how, you know, Indian thought views time, that it's circular. I think I was unconsciously doing that in the book. I just didn't know that I was doing it. And he's absolutely right. The idea is that the past, present, and the future all exist simultaneously at the same time. And I think in writing the book, because I actually started at sort of two different polarities. I was looking at you know, a young Indian girl growing up in colonial Burma in the 1930s, when there was a lot of colonial unrest and, you know, racial unrest in Rangoon, how she was growing up. And then I was sort of jumping forward a few decades, looking at her granddaughter growing up as a young woman in sort of urban, you know, kind of at the cusp of political awakening in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. And I was trying to see how those things connected and what were the things that got them together. And it was really, really hard to write that. Getting the history right was also difficult, especially with regards to Burma, because there's not many records of what went on at the time in Rangoon. There were a lot of racial riots. There were a lot of colonial punishments, things that people didn't really talk about. And so, you know, researching that was already hard. And then trying to connect those dots in terms of time was, I think, the greatest challenge. I think towards the end, there's a line in the book that says, and it's sort of the big lesson that the grandmother passes on to the granddaughter in some sense. And the line goes, everything that has happened has always already happened. And the idea is that, and therefore, why worry about anything? Because it's already been done. Which kind of negates the idea of an unknown future, because if it's circular, it's just going to go back, really. And yeah, it was something that, I don't know how to say, it's not something that I did with any conscious intention. It's literally how it turned out. It literally just popped into the manuscript as I was finishing it, and as I was rearranging the chapters, you know, trying to find the timeline for this. But yeah, and also, I mean, that story about bringing the Durga back, I think that's pretty incredible. And I'm actually curious to see, like, what's going to happen to the Durga from now. You know, somebody should write a book about that. But
I'll send Ravi a link. I actually wrote the whole thing, and he can forward it to you.
Yeah. And now it's in a temple, isn't it, Rakesh?
No, it's in a museum now.
Oh, it's in a museum. Okay.
Well, it's interesting to say that pre-Columbian cultures in Mexico, before Columbus' discovery and the Spanish conquest, thought about the time in the same manner as Syria. Yeah. So Christianity transformed that time vision into a linear one, as you know, Judeo-Christian vision of time. But in our essence, as Mexicans, we have that same conception, that poetic conception of the instant as the center of the sphere where all the times are one. So that's why I think Mexico is a great land for poetry, of poets, such as India, of course, that has an amazing tradition of poetry, and overall Asia, because that, and I think, because I'm pretty sure that derives, is a consequence of that vision of time, of that circular or not linear way of regarding time and space. That's totally the no time is the time of poetry.
That's beautifully said. And of course, Octavio Paz was ambassador to India, wasn't he, Fernando?
Yeah.
Yes, Octavio Paz, which was our only Nobel Prize in Literature, an amazing poet, and he also wrote great essays, of course. Has a great body of work. He was when he was around in his 50s, more or less, he was appointed ambassador in India, and he lived there for several years, and that was a great creative period for Octavio Paz. He wrote 3 key poetry collections. He wrote them in New Delhi while he was living there. Yeah, and of course he mingled his native Mexican conceptions of things with all the influence he was receiving from that experience. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the conception of time in some of his works is very Vedic, in fact. And let me ask you, Fernando, this is a little digressionary, but now you've been living in the U.S. for almost a year. Is it
almost 2 years now.
Oh, 2 years now.
Yeah.
And having come from Mexico, and I'm just curious about what your experience has been like. Of course, you're in San Francisco, which is quite a liberal place in many ways, but you've traveled a little bit in the U.S. And how do you feel about that? Your Mexican identity as you kind of make your way working and living in America?
Well, so far it has been a great experience, to be honest. I haven't had any issues or troubles at all. And I think the fact of living in San Francisco has to do a lot with it, because it's a city that just imagine this: 40% of the population is it's a mix of Asian Americans. So white people are only 40%. So it's a city that it's already open and used to the presence of the abroad within. So that helps a lot, and also the liberal thinking tradition of the city. So that makes it a multicultural city, and of course, with a lot of diasporas, creative diasporas from different cultures and traditions. So far, I've loved it, to be very honest. And besides, it's a city with a beautiful urbanistic beauty, and natural wise, it's also, wow, it's natural beauty. It's remarkable, and all the outskirts, of course. So it has been a great experience. Thanks.
Oh, great. Oh, I'm glad to. Yes, I love the Muir Woods and the redwoods, of course, out there. They're extraordinary.
Yeah, definitely.
Francis, of course, is in a different landscape, and so you mentioned a little bit about Vincent Chen, who I think is sadly not as well known as needs be. And I'm curious, the first piece you read was also kind of about the reaction that Asian American communities have been having, I think, for a while, since 9/11 probably, but certainly with the election of Trump and now with coronavirus. What can you speak to that a little bit, Francis? What are you finding as you kind of canvass and talk to people around the country?
Well, Asian American history, ethnic studies in general is not taught in American schools, so no one knows this history. And a lot of Asian Americans, I teach an hour outside of Detroit, and every year we ask the students, so how many of you know the story of Vincent Chen? And nobody knows, right? And they grew up here. So around the country, there are very few people know about this case. But the significance of it, because unfortunately there's hate crimes all the time, what happened in this case was that the people who killed him really were not punished, and then that caused the Asian American community to band together and say, oh, we need to do something. It doesn't matter that I'm Chinese and you're Japanese and you're Korean and you're Indian. Racists are not very smart and can't tell us apart. And so, that was kind of the big awakening in the 80s. And with coronavirus, with the Asian American population, we always had new people coming in, and so with the coronavirus, a lot of people were saying, this has never happened to me before. I didn't know about this. And then so the elders, the movement elders were saying, you need to learn the story of Vincent Chin. And so they were, you know, oh my God, all of May was town hall meetings with people telling the story. Oh, sorry. Telling that story. And then now, you know, that was a month ago, feels like a million years ago, but now with the Black Lives Matter movement taking, you know, center stage, there's no way that anyone cannot know what's, you know, and this is a story that affects Asian Americans as well. And there's a lot of power to be had in interethnic, interracial solidarity. And so Agents for Black Lives, and there's another project about Letters for Black Lives, really great projects so that people can work together, you know, for all of us, and it helps all of us.
Yeah, I think it's the workings out of privilege sometimes try to mobilize different ethnic groups against one another when in fact they're much better supported by joining forces. And I think a lot of that great work is really important that Francis mentioned. And I'm seeing some common themes here. I mean, this is obviously a very discordant, difficult moment. There's a lot of uncertainty in the air. And Patrick, it sounds like your novel has tapped into some of the dystopian energy that's around. Is that kind of what fed the idea for it? Have you been feeling this kind of in the zeitgeist, in the climate a little bit? Or how did you come upon this idea for your novel?
Yeah, Ravi, clearly I must have been feeling a little bit down about things somewhere along the line to start a book like that. I think what I was doing was trying to think about the way I think about the future on an emotional level rather than, say, an intellectual level or a political level, and think about my own sense of a certain amount of hopelessness on the one hand, but wanting to hold on to hope, and to think about having those two things simultaneously. How can hope and hopelessness reconcile and come together? And Rakesh's talk about wonder really struck a chord with me, actually. Wonder on the one hand and despair on the other. So the novel looks sort of 30 years into the future, past the moment of whatever catastrophe befalls the earth, and I'm actually particularly interested in what happens when a small group of people try and rebuild. So I'm thinking more about enduring and carrying on than necessarily the events that cause the earth to reach such a poisoned state.
That's I think all of us in our work are engaging with some conception of the future, and both in terms of aesthetics and arts, and in terms of pedagogy and our future relationships. I mean, how do you all feel like the future is looking as we kind of are coming out of this, hopefully, this pandemic moment? It feels like things are altered inextricably from here on out. And so what Patrick was saying about maintaining hope, even while we're perhaps a little more aware of the dangers around us, I mean, what do you all envision as potential futures and good outcomes from all of this?
Well, I may say that talking about wonder, I mean, if this situation, if there's one good thing for the situation is that maybe we don't even more that brief suspension of disbelief for fiction. I mean, reality constantly provides us with situations that, I mean, we're there's no place for disbelief anymore. So that's good for art, and for and also one of the nerves of and of the veins of confinement, I think, is and of its lessons is the need of staying in the present time, which is not very human, because our nature tends to imagine towards the future and to savor the memories of the past. That's very human. So staying in the present and having to stay in the present as a reflect of the confinement, as an inner reflection of that confinement, it's a very difficult and interesting practice, but that I think will have us fruition to let us know how to stay in the present. So I think that's going to be one of the good outcomes of this situation.
So I'm happy to repeat where I started my conversation. At its most extreme, whether you look at Patrick's work or whether some of the themes that she touched on, the ultimate enemy of human existence is death. And violence is its agent. So remember the line I said, what is the wisdom in the oldest text that humanity treasures? What is it that causes the death of death? Meaning, how do you end this threat of death? Usha, the life of life and the death of death. So what ends the threat of death is the life of life. What is the life of life? It is the creative power that gives you life. So my answer to your question, Shri, is this. It's not just hope, it's not just optimism. It is the wisdom of human experience and life experience. You will see an explosion of creativity. And this creativity is not going to be limited, but it should be led by the artist. This is the time for artists to be the boldest, the most audacious in their creative powers. But you will see scientists being creative. My prediction is you are going to see the post-COVID, post-Black Lives phase as representing a turning point where there will be huge unlocking of human creativity. And we will go into a better state as a result of it. This is not hope, this is not optimism, this is conviction based on studying history of what it means.
Well, I'm gonna come up with a rather more prosaic take on this, I think, because I think looking at our current reality right now, the virus is having varied forms of success and failure in different countries, and so much of it is depending on how those countries are being governed, how the leaders are making certain decisions, how the public health community is taking it up or taking it on, and what kind of resources they have. So that is, I think, it's just going to have to play itself out, because the virus is the virus, and eventually, it will die out, or we'll get a vaccine or something. But my larger concern, I think, is really about the fact that a lot of the nation states, despite having a global pandemic that is supposedly, the great equalizer and supposed to unite us, the nation states, I don't really see how they are really coming together. In a sense, there seems to be a bit more polarity. There seems to be a bit more suspicion of the other. There's all this talk about America versus China and what's going to happen, and should we be worried? And then the Black Lives protest happened, and sure, it's a good thing that it happened, but it's also interesting at the just the sheer breadth of that protest as well. So my concern is more about how the nation states are going to get along after the pandemic is officially over. It's because, after World War II, there was a very definite point at which the war ended, and everyone, it was a very significant point, and everybody came out and they were very happy to be with each other. I don't think that's going to happen with this pandemic, but I'm curious to see where our international relationships are going to be in 2-3 years' time when everything is done. I hope we're more on the same page than on different chapters, really. So, yeah, sorry to.
Yeah, but that's right. More into the political universe. I do agree with Rakesh that hope will not, and I do agree with you, Sri, that hope won't come from those high circles or high spheres that are quite abstract. Hope will come from the inner creativity of the individual. And that will spread as a fire eventually. But as always, and that happened as well after the Great Wars, it was the individual existence and its craft that pushed forward.
Oh.
That's so interesting, and then we're having these varying visions, both of which I like and both of which are possible. Patrick and Francis, do you have a sense of this? I mean, do you think that the forces of creativity can get hold and transform and help us overcome some of the environmental and social challenges that we have? Or is it that the nation states will kind of get in the way and that, in fact, there's more despair in the future? I mean, how are you feeling about this?
Look, I think it's hard to say. On the one hand, I think if we see that explosion of creativity that we're talking about, and I think there's maybe signs of that already, one of the things I hope is that what that explosion directly addresses is sort of the power of speculation to challenge in whatever direct way is possible the 24-hour news cycle that we're or even the 5-minute news cycle that we find ourselves now beholden to, and in a country like mine, the 3-year electoral cycle that we find ourselves bound to, and look further afield. Look genuinely to 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ahead, and our everyday thinking is more wedded to those longer timeframes. I hope for that. I see some signs of that, and I see some signs that my hope is more something resembling blind optimism.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of amazing art that's already being created. During a month ago, in the midst of the anti-Asian violence, there was an incredible amount of art that was coming out of the Asian American community fighting this. And now where all the cities have had their downtowns boarded up with the businesses who boarded up their business, who boarded up their storefronts, those pieces of plywood are being covered by beautiful murals in Oakland, Minneapolis, New York. I've seen, and today, the president has surrounded the White House with this big fence. People are going up and they're covering the fence up with art, and I think that's just, it's amazing, and you can't stop it.
Yeah. If I may add something else, part of our, if we can talk about missions in art, just first, not really kind of a mission, but part of the things we gotta search after this and during this situation is we gotta try that our craft helps in the return to touch. We gotta recover touch, and art has to find pathways towards touch and closeness.
So I will submit something for the consideration of everybody in this panel. When you think about the horror of the Spanish War, Ravi, Not one person will be able to name the generals who fought that. Not one person will remember the politicians. Not one person will remember anything. But it's Picasso's Guernica that triumphs, right?
Right.
And so I'm going to submit something very humbly for your consideration. That video that was taken in Minneapolis of George Floyd, don't think of it for a minute as a witness. Think of it as art. Art that filled humanity with horror. Art that led to a global movement because it brought the horror that Picasso in his time, in his age, brought out of his mural on Guernica.
Hmm.
That is a manifestation of the power of art in evoking emotions. So I would submit to you that artists have a profound role. They will, in many cases, use technologies as was used by that person who got that moment of horror. New artists will emerge, and you watch.
Hmm.
I think Fernando and I are in agreement. We will triumph over the people that Shri has correctly identified are the people who seek to control us, who seek to keep our spirit in chains. No, we'll break across them. Today is a great day for two reasons. There were no COVID deaths in New York City the first day, and two, the Minneapolis Council has decided to disband their police force. Just see, we're in the midst of profound change already, and
Yeah.
this is big.
That's a really interesting, provocative stance that Rakesh has offered, and I think I'm in agreement, except for the fact that a man has lost his life, right, which makes it hard for me to transmute it into aesthetic experience. But I did think and I think what was most chilling for me was the kind of look of half bemusement and kind of puzzled rectitude on the officer's face, as if, and it's true, 300 years ago they might have cast a statue in bronze of him kneeling over some Native Americans in much the same posture. I think in San Francisco, and they recently took down in front of the Civic Center, they had a kind of racist statue from that era that they recently took down. And so I mean that in these 300 years that these changes take time. I think, the civil rights movement was in the 1960s and we're still untangling all of this. But I agree. I mean, I hope that seeing that, whenever I see video like that, I always think of how many instances there is no video available. And we almost are a culture that's ocular centric and need to see things with our eyes to believe. And maybe this is where what Fernando was saying about touch and bringing back our other senses is really important.
Just see, Ravi, not to belabor the point, what three words of, think of it from an artistic point of view for a minute.
Yeah,
not
the art comes.
I can't breathe. Think of the shattering artistic impact of those three words. I can't breathe. Don't look at it literally, that his life was being taken away. But think about the horror, you use the word chilling, inside you as you hear those words.
Yes, of course, I do agree, but I do agree with the reaction towards the horror. I mean, if there's one truth about the Christian tradition is, I do believe that there's we're similar to God in the sense of creation, the capability of creating things. So, and creation comes as a response to chaos, or upon chaos. So horror, the horror entailed in that horrific and brutal crime, it's one of chaos consequences. But the reaction of the human beings is creating, it's crafting things as a response to find any sort of sense or response to confront chaos and horror. But I honestly can't see as a manifestation of aesthetics a crime of that level.
But Fernando, let me submit.
That simulation of that and the response and the fruition of craft out of the people as a response towards it, that's art.
Let me submit just something you touched on. You use the word Christian. Let me respectfully submit something to you by expanding your point. The most horrific thing that happened 2020 years ago was the crucifixion of Christ. Think about it. No different in horror. And that was the beginning of the Christian faith. That was the beginning of love for humanity, compassion. So these are very powerful aesthetic things that arise out of horror.
That I do agree. That I do agree. What arises as a response upon a horror.
All over the world where I've traveled, and I go to China a lot, and I've gone to all the churches. The oldest church in India, in Goa, the great churches of Europe, Latin America, what do you see in each church? You see the crucifixion of Christ. That is the transformative power of suffering. Suffering unlocks creative power in a way that is not to be underestimated. And I am respectfully submitting this particular thing that has happened.
I agree.
Enormous potential.
A great poet, Chilean poet called Raúl Zurita, that maybe many of you have heard of or have read. He's one of our greatest poets in Spanish. He has wrote an essay where basically he states that if there wasn't horror, I mean that art is necessary because horror and chaos still exists, and evil. If there wasn't evil at all, or if there's a time where humanity reaches that point where no evil exists at all, and hypothetical time, then art wouldn't be needed, because art just exists in response or as a creating response towards the evil. So that's the same idea of that great poet. That's basically the same of what you're stating here, Rakesh. So it makes sense. The only little thing that I differ, I mean, I basically do agree with you. I just differ in calling aesthetic experience crime.
Francis, I saw you shaking your head. What were you going to say during this discussion?
Me?
Oh, yeah. Well, before I thought I saw you want to say something.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with Fernando. I mean, the art that comes out of, I mean, the art that comes out of, I want to say life, the reaction, that is what is of interest. And there's, because the people who are, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think art, yeah, look at the art of the reaction, and that there's been so much created by people's responding to it. I think there's a lot of power there.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is there needs to be a creative response, but there needs to also be enormous policy changes, right? I mean, the thing is when racism is institutionalized, it really gets kind of submerged, and you have to, from every level, it's just not policing, right? It's the prosecution, it's probation, it's reintegration, it's all of these different forces that are conspiring. And so I do think that people are going to be mobilized creatively and socially, and maybe this is a pivotal moment. I mean, of course, I remember Rodney King and Abner Louima and Michael Brown and so many others, which didn't seem to catalyze the necessary changes, but maybe in this instance with George Floyd, that something could happen.
This one feels different.
It does feel different, doesn't it? I wanted to bring Patrick and Sri into this because in the comments here, someone mentioned something about Indigenous Lives Matter, which is a movement I don't know much about, but is this something happening in Australia now?
I think Patrick's probably the best to answer that. But before that, I just want to very quickly interject and say I completely agree with the idea that what comes out of it when you look back, it's the art that will stand through something that's like a pandemic. And I also just want to quickly say sometimes we're so in it. Sometimes I feel it's not really up to us to, I suppose, guess what that could be. It would be up to, as Ravi said, if there are sufficiently significant policy changes, 50 years from now, you look back, that's when we will know if the artistic response or the response to what happened to George Floyd would be considered something that is artistic. That's just my take on it, but I'm going to throw the thing onto Patrick about Indigenous Lives Matter.
Thanks, Sri. Yeah, certainly in Australia, in the last week or so, we've been on our television screens and our social media feeds looking to events in the US. But as we do that, we need to look to events in Australia as well, the recent past and the distant past, and that phrase Black Lives Matters has a resonance, or should have a resonance in Australia in the same way that it does in a different set of circumstances in the US. So I think it's very easy to look to other countries and to wonder how certain things can happen in those places, and sometimes that's a way of avoiding looking towards our own backyard as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the one big thing that I see is that it's sort of how do I say, sort of like a negative consequence of how good we have it in a way. Like, the fact that compared to the US, we flatten the curve much quicker. Things are much better here. Things are more comfortable here. And I think a part of it is also sort of muted the response to how Indigenous lives are treated in prison. I don't want to touch too much on it because it is a very sensitive topic over here, very, very sensitive. But I just feel, the idea of the lucky country here has also maybe made people complacent about dealing with that issue. But that's just my take on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think we didn't really need the cell phone video footage, right? If you can look at the fact that the incarcerated population in the U.S. has increased almost 1,000% since the 1980s, and that if you look at the racial demographic, there's such a disproportionate amount of African Americans and Hispanic Americans incarcerated that. So hopefully this will start to catalyze change. I realize we're kind of getting to the end of this fascinating talk and reading. I'm so glad to have had the chance to have all of you on there. I wanted to tell people that there are discussions in New York Writers Workshop is hosting throughout the week. Check the website. There's, I think, something on Monday and Wednesday, and then on Bloomsday, I'm very excited. On the 16th, there's going to be a conversation that includes the legendary James Joyce scholar, Dr. Fritz Zen, who is 90 years old and coming to us from Zurich, Switzerland. So that should be pretty remarkable, and a couple of other Irish writers and Joyce scholars for Bloomsday. But anyway, before we end, I thought I would just go around and give each of you a final word, either something you want to leave us with, something you're working on, something that you've been reading or thinking about. kind of a last little bit of wisdom, whatever you like. So I don't know who wants to go first. I can always call on someone, but
we're just thinking.
Yes.
Ravi, perhaps I'll read the epigraph from my at the front of my novel, which is a quote from a letter from the New Zealand short story writer Catherine Mansfield, writing a letter to Dorothy Brett, the visual artist, on 14th of August 1918. The world is so dreadful in many ways. Do let us be tender with each other.
Nice one.
Yeah.
Nice one.
Beautiful to end on. Others?
I will end by saying that when you look at history, what you discover is some of the greatest inventions, discoveries, profound movements occurred because somebody went and quarantined himself in a cave. Prophet Muhammad went in a cave and heard the Quran. Moses and Saint Elijah went in a cave. Maimonides, the Jewish polymath, wrote his seminal book in a cave. Newton wrote some of his finest works because there was an epidemic going on, coincidentally, and he was quarantined. In India, Ramakrishna lived in a cave. Plato wrote his allegory of a cave. So I think we have to recognize that this particular period that we're going through is really a chance for us to get in touch with our own selves, unlock our creative energy, and to the degree we can shed the periphery of our existence during this time period, let's look upon it as an opportunity and unlock our full potency so that when we re-emerge in a new world, we do so stronger and better.
Right. I love that, Rakesh, a kind of chrysalis moment of isolation so that we transform and when we come out on the other side.
Yeah. For me, the thing that I've been thinking about the most at this time and looking at what's happening around the world, I want to call on everyone to examine the idea of choice. What kind of choices are we making at this time? I think it's especially profound now because we are now distanced and quarantined due to elements that are outside our choices. We didn't choose this. The world chose this for us in a way. So while we're in that, examine how are you choosing to love your loved ones? How are you choosing to forgive hurts of the past? How are you choosing to buy your groceries? How are you choosing to make your protest over your government? How are you choosing to deal with your taxes? I think if we try to do that, I think it's a way to gain a semblance of normalcy, I guess, with what's happening right now. And it's just something to get through our days as we look towards a better future.
Great advice, Sri. Thank you.
Well, yeah, and I would, can I add on to that? Because a lot of people have been saying, oh, when we get back to normal, when things get back to normal. But I think this is a great opportunity for us to think about the things that were not working in the normal and things. And I think this is kind of, personally as well as politically. And I think we're seeing a lot of this right now. So this is a great opportunity that we have some time to think about what can we change, what can we get rid of, what can we take on new, what can we change to make, quote unquote, normal actually work and better.
That's great. I mean, really putting pressure on what is considered normal, right? And then unearthing some of those things that are really actually quite harmful. Fernando, how about you?
Well, normal is nothing but a fluid. It's fluid concept. Okay. Well, I just want to thank everyone and thank to all the audience that joined us, to my fellow colleagues, to you, Ravi, And again to the institutions that are organized and convened these series of readings. And I just want to emphasize again that as artists, through our craft, we gotta look for pathways to regain touch and closeness, because that's what COVID has taken from us. So we gotta start that odyssey of return towards touch and closeness. And just adding to Patrick's epigraph about tenderness. Tenderness is not lack of strength. Tenderness is capability of empathy and capability of hearing while being creative.
I think that's great, and I love the idea of tenderness as really such a strength, right? I mean, I think when we think of normalcy, I think of masculinity and how normal men are supposed to engage with the world as one small example. And so rethinking tenderness is a big part of that conversation of how we raise our young men, I think could be an important thing as well. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, Fernando, Sri, Francis, and Rakesh, all with new work, which we will post about online. I hope you will support writers during this time. Everyone, I take a screenshot of this. Everyone's holding up their book there. Yes, excellent. I'm Ravi Shankar. This has been Isolation Break. It's a co-production of the New York Writers Workshop and the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators. I hope you'll join us for the next iteration. And in the meantime, stay safe and well and woke and creative. And we'll talk to you all later. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Good
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, Ravi. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.